Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I would love to introduce you to my parents. It is such an esteemed honor and pleasure to have them here with me today to discuss some of the very important topics that are going on in our world. With all that's happening after the recent protests and riots, I asked them to join me today because we have such a rich history in this country, and I wanted to discuss with them so that maybe they can share with you all some of the wisdom that they have over the years of seeing this country go from one stage to the next, and their journey through Islam and some of the things that they can share with the world in efforts or in hope to possibly bring someone an answer, someone who may need it, or possibly shed light on areas that people never really delve into. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my parents. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So this is my Abu and my Ummi, and I have a few questions for them. I've written them up so that I don't get too far off topic, but I wanted to know, because you made such a journey from city life over the years into country living, and we live in a time where some people are still searching for what you have found already. So the first question I have for you is, how was city life just before you decided to make the leap of faith, better known as the longest hijrah in history, and you removed your entire family to start life anew in the country? So you went from city to what, a town to country, or how did that transpire? You did it with a community, you did it on your own, how did that happen?
No, I'm waiting for you.
So you picked up, you packed up, you
got rid of things and picked up and packed up, exactly. And
you
left everything behind.
Okay. And in one time, I do remember you saying you got to California with like just Iman, shirt on your back, and just your faith. How does that?
Yes, well, we lived in Brooklyn, New York for a good number of years, and practicing Islam, so we thought, over these years. And then Sheikh Mubarak Ali Shah came to our community and advised us that we couldn't practice Islam in this type of an environment. How are you going to practice religion, holiness, when above you is a house of prostitution and below you is a gambling casino and these type of things? We had to, get away from that and move someplace that was more pure. And it was suggested that we go to California, which made it the longest hijrah, 3,000 miles, made it the longest journey in Islamic history, actually.
Right.
We packed up as a family. It was, I think, 5 or 6 carloads of us that left Brooklyn at the same time and headed to California. We were so involved in getting away from this fitna of the city, distractions and garbage that we lived in, that when we left home, when we left our home, we broke down before we got out of Brooklyn, but we did not go back to our apartments. We stayed in the car all night just so that we wouldn't go back. We never wanted to turn back once we left. And what happened was we we one of the brothers on the trip was a mechanic, and wound up fixing the car the next morning as soon as some place opened where we could get the parts. We fixed the cars and we traveled with our families. And it was really a trip. It took us, I think, 9 days.
Yeah, like 9 days.
It took 9 days to get from Brooklyn, New York to Compton, California, because of the different little things that would happen on the trip. And we had, you know, babies, very young children with us, infants. And we cooked on the side of the road. We stopped on Indian reservations. It was really, it was really a trip. We stopped in one time to do our laundry, and the police came and escorted us to the city limits, and then turned around and went back. As long as we got out of their town, they was happy with us. You know, I don't know what they thought was going to happen to their town because we did our laundry there, but we ran into all kind of
I'd forgotten that.
we ran into all kind of interesting things on this trip. People were calling back home saying we're lost. We were never lost, but you know, we made it. When we got to California, there was a jamaat of people there that welcomed us. When I got there, I had 35 cents in my pocket and about 6, 7 children and a wife to take care of. No place to live. People opened their doors to us. And from that point, we started, you know, different brothers started looking for work to take care of their families. We couldn't, you know, it was hard for us to find work in a place that we had no knowledge of. So I had a few skills. I started sewing and making things that people in the community needed. And $10 here, $20 there. And we managed to, as a group, we learned that when you eat and you pray together, Allah expands whatever you have. I've seen where we would sit down with 2 or 3 plates of food and 6 or 7 people, and we all ate from the same plate and drank from the same glasses, and everybody left that table or maida full, you know. And just things like that would happen. It increased our faith, and we got away from the drudgery of living in filth, and there was so much difference. When I went back to New York as a truck driver, when I had to go back to New York at one time after that, and when I seen the difference in how I was living well, Compton was like a suburbs of Los Angeles, but it was so much cleaner than where we came from in East New York. It was like, I felt like I was like Oscar the Grouch coming out of a garbage can when I came through the Harlem Tunnel. You know, when I looked at New York for a re-look at New York. And
okay, so that brings me to my next question, which is, what kept you driven? You started from scratch, so to speak, in California, starting off 35 cents. I can't even imagine that. I wasn't born then. But what kept you driven enough to move forward and not turn back, or not, you know, you never wavered, you never left? We know a lot of people who have sort of, I don't want to use the term fallen off, but for lack of a better term, they're no longer with us. They couldn't hold on. For whatever their reasons are, what kept you all going? What kept your iman so high, or your just community, or the imam, the sheikh? How did that, what made you want to keep moving forward? Like, I can get through this and we're going to get to the next step.
I think it is it's partially community, because we all had the same mindset. We all had the same goal,
Right. You saw the goal.
And usually amongst African Americans, you don't see that. You'll see it in Hispanic communities, you see it in other communities where it's just known, where they can bond and have the same focus. But we hadn't seen that amongst ourselves. Even in East New York, you didn't see it like that. But I think your iman is increased when you recognize you've all made the same move for the same reason. And and the people that received us, I thought, played such a role to open up your doors and really, really show love and welcome. There's one thing to do things because you're compelled by another reason. But this was all for the love of Allah. These people just let us in. They didn't know us at all. And coming from East New York did not help because people that lived in East New York had such a reputation because it was so ghetto. We thought Compton was a ghetto. We saw Compton, we went, what? There's no ghetto like where we were in places like Manhattan. But I think we bonded because we had the same shape. We knew that we all made the right decision, just the reflection of each other.
Right.
That
And you
made
gave
it
each other strength.
absolutely. It made it work.
Nice. So in 2020, like all these years later, and you see these Black Lives Matter protesters and all the riots that are taking place and all of that, does it make you feel like you've come so far away from that you can kind of, you're outside looking in? And I'm sure you're grateful that you're not in that position, but if you can put it into words, how would you say, like, you can now see where you would have been had you stayed, right? What, I'm trying to find my own words for it because it makes me feel grateful that I have never experienced that because of the decision you made long before I was born. How does it make you feel? We feel accomplished. You know, how does it make you feel to know that you didn't look back and you, without a doubt, you took that leap of faith? I keep saying leap of faith. It's the longest hijrah in history. How does it make you feel to be able to now, in 2020, you're looking at these people rioting and protesting and arguing and going through the same nonsense in what they call it the trap. They don't call it the projects, or maybe some people still call it the projects, but they now call it the trap because they feel like they're trapped in those inner cities. How does it make you feel to know that you made the right decision, and how would you encourage other people to make that move as well?
Well, you know, in Holy Quran, Allah states that this world is spacious. And why do they stay there in these inner cities? Why do they stay there? Do they think that, you remember Malcolm X? You remember he said, where can I get a better job than this? Where can I get a better clothes? Where can I wear better clothes than this? I mean, it goes back way before Malcolm X. Holy Quran says, you know, that the earth is spacious.
Right.
You know, get out of those places. You don't, you know, if you trust in God Almighty, you don't have to worry about your risk. Birds don't worry about their risk. They get up in the morning, go out and find that worm.
Right.
You know, and they bring it back to their chicks. You know, it's like our Sheikh says, he had told us, he says, I don't know what to do with you people. Maybe I have to do like the hawk and take you out on the limb, take the chick out on the limb and kick them off in order to make them fly. But why do these people stay, you know, begging for help and begging for assistance when, you know, when if they trust in Allah, you know, they have it on their money in God we trust,
Right.
but they don't practice in God we trust.
Right, absolutely. Right.
What can I tell you?
Yeah. So I have another one. So as a child growing up in your household, I can attest to, we were never allowed to use the N-word. We weren't allowed to call ourselves black in that term, like in that sense where it's a certain mindset that you wanted to keep us from having. You wanted us to have a more open mind than that. So you didn't want us to use the N-word. You didn't want us to use these terms black, like I'm a black person, and you wanted us to have an identity. First, I remember Islamic identity, Muslim identity. We're Muslim, we're American, we're Muslim. You educated us. What made you pull us, so far from that word? It was like profanity in our house. It was like a curse word. We can't use this term with each other. Do you think it was part of your upbringing, Islam, or both, or where did that come from, that it was practiced so strongly in our house that we could not use certain slang terms in our household?
Well, from childhood, we weren't allowed in my mother's house to say certain things. And that's where you get your values from.
Right.
The word Negro was preferred in my house, but the term Negro became a negative term. It's almost like reflections of slavery have not gone away. So you run from that, and then our Murshid, Kamil Sheikh Sayyid Mubarak Shah Jalani, encouraged us not to label ourselves in a negative manner. You don't want to be anything other than a good Muslim, but you have a country. People they know who they are, they know where they're from. And having come from slavery, of course, we don't know where we came from. But don't adopt the negative narrative that's been given, like calling yourself black. I had mentioned to you the other day that nobody wants to be black. We don't even like our coffee black. We put milk in it. I was just telling you. Because black, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's negative. I don't want to start referring to Malcolm X again, but sometimes he brings about a lot of awareness because of his exposure or whatever. You have to know who you are, and you're not a color. You're literally just not a color. And there's one change I see that's very different from back in the days when we were bringing our children up. I noticed that some people, when you look them up, let's say you Google their names, and they're African American, and they just call them American. I thought that's something that sort of moved, ends very, very smoothly, but without being noticed. They don't call them African Americans or Black Americans. Even in Google, they call them American, the American poet, the American actor, because calling them black, they don't like that either.
Right.
Plus we were told by Mubarak Ali Shah Jalani that we're not black. Black people are the people of the fire. Black people we even were told not to even wear black shoes, to dress in all black, because black will be the people of the hellfire. We're people. We're Muslim. And what does a color have to do with the heart?
Right. So I do have all these questions. As far as madrasa, instead of putting your children in the public school system, you chose to put all of your children through homeschool. And in the madrasa, which was the Islamic school that had been established in the community, and it got to a point where people were just sending their children to you. For years now, even my peers, once they had kids, my peers were taught by you. Then when they grew up, had their own children, they started sending their children to you. What drove you to do that? You didn't grow up homeschooled. What was the desire?
Let me give an intro and then you can pick it up.
Okay.
Because I don't know if he'll bring it up himself.
Okay.
He and another brother were discussing the fact that our children were reaching the age of first grade. And I was prepared to put my son into first grade. I was so happy. The school was right down the block, a little bit around the corner, good school. At that time, we weren't in East New York. We moved to East New York to be closer to the other Muslims who moved there together. But at that time, I was prepared to put my son in public school. And this other brother was prepared to put his daughter in public school. And the two of them came up with the idea that we should have a school, actual school in the Jamaat, which this brother's wife and myself and another lady who actually had the building first. I think she had a nursery school there. She donated her building because we couldn't pay rent. We charged tuition. And that started the movement of teaching our own children right then. And then, of course, after we made this hijra, people taught in pockets. But the beginning of that was due to the fact that your father and his other brother came up with the idea that they were going to have their children educated properly without all the, you think it's bad now in the dunya, it was still bad. So they were the ones who actually started the notion of actually having a school, which has grown into the madrasas that are all over the country today.
And those madrasas are such a saving grace now, because after this pandemic that hit with the coronavirus, the COVID-19, because of the generations of homeschoolers that had been established over how many years now? Over 40? 50 maybe years?
Well, actually, 40 years?
It
45 years, maybe
okay.
45 years they started the first madrasa.
Well, it's still going, and passed on generation after generation. So when the world pandemic hit, a lot of people in the community were already homeschooling. So there was no rush for us to pull our children out of the school in fear that they may get sick. We had already had an establishment from our founding fathers and mothers, founding parents and uncles and aunts. They had already established it because they saw, what do they call it now? Alchemy? Alchemists who see a brighter future for you before you can see it. They saw our future and they started building it before we were born. And then by the time we had children, we were homeschooling them. This pandemic broke out and people were reaching out to us asking, well, how do you do it? Where do you find the patients, or where do I start? Things like that. And it's due to the blessings or the barakah that was passed down to us from our parents establishing that in the first place. But that brings me to speaking of, passing things down generation after generation. You both you play very integral roles in the community. You being a mason, so to speak, you've built so many buildings, helped lay bricks and foundations and places of worship. You being a custodian of those places of worship. So many people come there, they don't really realize who's behind it. Most people don't think that hard into it. They look at it, they like it, they see it, it's beautiful. Some people may ask, others may not, but you never toot your own horns. I'm sorry, I'm your daughter sitting here. Sometimes the apple falls from the tree because here I go tooting your horn. But how does it feel? You laid down a foundation physically, mentally, spiritually. You've built buildings that people come to for worship. I'm trying to, sum this up into a question. And at this point, you see where people are planting fruits and vegetables and harvesting. There's a community garden. We have our personal gardens. There are rose bushes outside of the buildings of worship and all of that. How does, if you could put it into words, do you feel like you succeeded in your mission, in all the sacrifice that you made, traveling over those hundreds of miles, showing up with 35 cents in your pocket, and now I could say you're the richest man on earth. With that foundation, you are the richest man on earth. So I would ask you, do you feel like your mission has been accomplished? Do you feel like there's more to do, or do you see where there can be improvement in the generations that came after you, some things that maybe they can do to improve or to keep it going? What would your advice be?
My daughter. The mission has not been accomplished because some of the trades or skills that we have, we're going to actually take it to the grave with them. I would like some students to teach them masonry or carpentry, or they're not. The youth these days are only interested in jobs where you don't have to do physical labor. You can just sit down at a computer which is fine if you can afford to take care of your family doing this. But somebody still has to build the house that you live in. Someone still has to, excuse me, someone still has to plant the food for you to eat. You know, we've been told Murshi Camille has not left us alone. He still tells us that we should be self-sufficient. We're not self-sufficient. You know, I would hate to take this bricklaying trade to the grave with me and nobody learn from it. You know, I'm not a master bricklayer, but I could teach you enough to get started. I could teach you enough to take over. Sometimes I get lost for words when I have to say things like this. But you know, we run into a generation of parents that don't want their children to have to do anything. They don't want the children to clean up the yards. They don't want the children to clean up the lands that we live on, you know. And the only time the adults will do it is if there's somebody coming from out of town to visit us that may be in authority or may be a relative of somebody in authority, and then everybody shows up to do this work. And after this authority figure leaves, the work stops. We wasn't raised like that. We were never raised like that. We were raised to do something, start something, and finish it. We never finish anything. And not to bring a lot of negativity, because there's so much positive stuff going on, you know, but we have to stop looking at personal wealth. We have to look at community wealth. You know, we're only as successful, we're only as strong as the weakest link. Everybody's heard that. We're only as successful if everybody is successful. You know, we got people that have skills, but they're not passing these skills on. You know, we got people that have skills, and they want you to pay them to teach Arabic, pay them to teach, you know, stuff that Allah has given them. You know, and we find out that we can't gain anything until we give something. You can't get anything with these fists balled up. You get more with your hands like this. So, you know, I don't want to talk too much on this, but sometimes these things really, really bother me. Next question.
Oh, well, that was, I mean, whoa. I mean, and okay, so going from the hand like this brings me back to the BLM or the Black Lives Matter. Some people would complain that what are the Muslims doing about it? And personally, I looked at it like we're setting an example. To me, we're setting an example as to how you should be living, or the things that you should, the steps you should take to get to a certain point where you don't have to stand there with your fist up saying Black Lives Matter and all of that, because in order to prove that you believe you matter, you have to act like it, you have to live like it, right? So what would your advice be to the people who don't understand why Muslims aren't taking to the street the way that so many of us did with Kashmir? We had an entire rally about oppressed people, and I've heard the question, why aren't we taking to the street and marching with the whole Black Lives Matter? I personally answered it and said, we're setting an example. And for anyone who's interested, here we are. We have our whole lives to show you. When we believed that our lives mattered, we took it into our own hands and made that leap, you know, that long hijrah. What would your advice or your words be to people who are trying to argue that Muslims don't stand up for non-Muslims who may be of the same race, so to speak. I know you were saying we don't really see it as a color, but how can they, or where can they start to make improvements to prove that they believe they matter? Because obviously you've done it with us. We don't feel the results of all that police brutality and the inner city struggles and things like that because you removed us from it. So how would you advise people to go about it? Do you tell them to go try to change the law or remove themselves from it, or what do you tell a person who is saying, how come y'all Muslims aren't doing anything? Personally, I feel like we are. We're living the example of how to show excuse me, that you matter.
Well, there's two aspects that have to be considered. When you stand up for people, they have to be more or less a righteous people, even if they're not Muslim. They have to be a righteous people who are living in a righteous environment or attempting to follow the book. For example, in Kashmir, they're not living like hoodlums, and a lot of things we see daily in America in particular. Of course in Europe, but in America, since that's where we're here, we are here now. So you just can't stand up for anybody. You just don't throw your weight into something. And I believe the tradition, the hadith of Rasulullah says not to be involved in civil strife. You never get involved in civil strife. And you can tell the difference between a righteous battle. You know, you're going to choose your battles. Because when all this yelling, screaming, burning, and rioting, and just civil protesting, when that's done, what is the result of that? What is the result of all of that as far as change? You still have to hope that you're in the right position to have Allah's favor on you. There are Muslims that go through a lot of different hardships and oppression in all over the world. We do not always follow up with rallying, marching for them. We don't do it because they may be in a place at a time where they're not trying to practice. They're not trying to establish what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said establish. So that means that they are Muslim, yes, but that doesn't mean you go out there and you rally and you put all your efforts and your money into that, because they're not struggling to do what they're supposed to be doing. So their oppression is different on a different level. Just as with our people here, we know what ghetto life is like. At least I do. Not that my home life was so ghetto, and even your father, we were brought up sort of like in the country. You know, we weren't really city people. We knew people in the city. We moved to the city. We visited the city, and we know what city life is like. So that they produce their own problems. City life, the way it is, I don't want to say they. When you live in the city, it produces a certain type of culture. You know, so you bring a lot of this to yourself. You have to do good things, and then when someone comes along and oppresses you, then someone can support that. But you're just striving to oppress Islam, or you're trying to just keep things going in a negative way, just please the self. Those, you know, you don't put your efforts out there for that. That's not the sacrifice you want to make to establish. So you do have to live the example that you've chosen as Muslims, but you just can't go out there. You have to, you know, pick your battles very carefully.
It's funny, I heard Malcolm X speak on the same, he said something similar to that. I don't remember verbatim.
Yeah, truth is truth. It doesn't matter who says it.
He said something very similar to that. But all in all, I think that concludes our interview. Unless y'all want me to ask more, I have questions for days, but but I think, I mean, I'm not sure how much time we've spent already. If you wanted to add any more.
I just want to add that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need anyone to do anything. And it's so clear right now. With all that we've been told to do by Shah Sahib, with all that we did not do or have not done yet, he is establishing his deen. There's more Islamic practice now in this country and across the world without them even realizing it. They will submit knowingly and unknowingly. He's doing what he does. You just sit back and you watch, because he's bringing about Islamic rule or whatever, you know, whatever term people want to use that
Islamic
shaped.
law, Islamic
Yeah, Sharia. That we're running from Sharia law. Look at them, the Sharia law they're trying to
covering
practice
their
now.
faces and all.
It's
Yeah,
like
distancing everything.
this whole trip is like riding in a Boeing 707, and you're 30,000 feet up in the air, and you look down at the ground, and it looks like you're moving at a pace that's creeping, and you're going 700 miles an hour. You know what I'm saying? It looks like we're not doing anything, but there are things being accomplished little by little, and it's all good because of Lecia and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's guiding him. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he's their Khalifa. So, inshallah, Islam will prevail. You know, but people have to practice the Christianity, Islam. It's like two peas in a pot. But what they have to remember is they have to practice it. They just can't say, I'm this, I am that, and label yourself, you know, and walk around with this big label. You have to practice these things. You know, Jesus prayed, you know, and before he would pray, you know, when he talks about he was in the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples, and he was washing their feet, he was showing them how to cleanse themselves before prayer. You know, so if they really, you know, really want to come together with this thing, you know, people want reparations, you know what I mean? So they can spend it in the club or whatever. You know, you know, they don't need reparations. They need to learn how to live. You know, learn how to purify themselves. And can I tell you, you could just go on and on and on.
Well, I certainly appreciate you all. I'm so glad to have my parents here who set the example, to share with you all many of the things that I could ask them questions forever. Because it's always interesting and it's always like the first time I'm hearing it. And I appreciate you all. If you have stayed this long, please keep my family in your du'as, and inshallah we'll do the same for you, praying for the Ummah at large, for the community. And if you would like to see more videos like this, please let me know down below in the comments. Let me know what you thought, and look for all the links in the description box. Oh, and we have a new podcast as well, the One Ummah podcast. I'll be leaving that link below as well for more talks and discussions on Islam. Thank you again for tuning in and for joining us here on our journey. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Taught us, he groomed us for us to become something more. Allah's blessing, mercy, and peace fall upon him in heavenly infinite space. Tearful souls, we are so grateful Allah sent you to us, beloved Murshid. Even though we fall short, time and time again, you never left us. We're so blessed, but we don't understand all the sacrifices that you make day in, day out, ensuring that we are all here. Generation after generation after generation, you say